welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the final story of Series 4 of the Sarah Jane Adventures, Goodbye Sarah Jane Smith. Written by Clayton Hickman and Gareth Roberts, and is directed by Josh Agnew. This was the last story of Series 5 and would be the last story, the last finale, as Series 5 sadly didn't conclude as Elizabeth Sladen had passed away halfway during the production of Series 5. So this is the true finale, as well as it kind of being fitting as the story is called Goodbye Sarah Jane Smith. And a lot of people consider this to be one of the last great stories of the series, and finds it a much better ending than the actual ending, The Man Who Never Was, which I haven't seen for the record. This is actually the last ever episode of Sarah Jane I've watched. As recording this video, I haven't seen any from Series 5 yet, so looking forward to that. But this is considered by many as the last great Sarah Jane adventure episode, and it has that kind of melancholy feeling retroactively looking back, knowing that this would be the last story airing when Elizabeth Sladen herself was alive. She passed away only a few days after the airing of this episode. I know I've said before in the marathon that she had passed away earlier on. However, it seems that I was mistaken. She actually passed away after the airing of this episode. So it does kind of have this feeling about it, and especially how, again, retroactively, the story itself kind of deals with a very similar situation in terms of talking about Sarah Jane's health. It's got this kind of really sad, emotional beat to it. If you can hear an ice cream van in the background, I do apologise. There's an ice cream van that's just past my house. If you hear it, just ignore it. But yeah, this is just a very kind of upsetting story, and I must be honest, it did take me a while to start recording this, because I haven't actually seen this episode before. I haven't seen any episode for most of the part of Sarah Jane, so this is actually the first time I've ever watched the story, and I needed some time to take my feelings, and the fact that, because Sarah Jane is an icon in my childhood, I grew up watching her stories with the 4th and 3rd Doctor, only to be pleasantly surprised when she returned in the revived series with David Tennant, and later on meeting Matt Smith in her own spin-off series, and having a spin-off series which was hugely loved by fans. So, it kind of feels like a part of me is going wrong with this story as well, because I heard about Elizabeth's passing, and I've heard, of course, it was a massive, big deal and upsetting, and I remember just feeling this emptiness when they announced that Elizabeth Sladen had passed away. But I never, at that moment in time, the only Sarah Jane Adventure episodes I had watched were the Death to the Doctor, the Wedding of River Song, and the Wedding of Sarah Jane, the one with the Brigadier, which is the Return of the Bane, the Mark of the Bane, and Invasion of the Bane, which is the first episode. So when she passed away, I only watched a handful of episodes, but now I've watched them all now, and yeah, it's still got 3 episodes left in the series with Series 5, but a lot of people do consider this the real, true finale to Sarah Jane Smith. And yeah, I don't know if the people behind the scenes knew that she had cancer when they filmed this episode, but you can imagine that Elizabeth Sladen clearly knew. So, did that influence her performance? Who knows? The story. Just jumped into the story. The story itself. I'm just going to try to brieferize anything. I don't really want to do what I usually do, which is go into bulk, just talk about the story, and then if I like something or dislike something, I point it out. So we're going to try and do something different. Mainly because I'm just tired of doing that format. In the story, what happens essentially is Sarah Jane seems to become pretty forgetful. She forgets to lock her car, she forgets to lock her house, she leaves the... she doesn't put on the brakes in her car, so her car starts going downhill and stuff. She forgets about Luke, she forgets about things. And essentially she is developing some sort of dementia. She keeps forgetting things and she's getting confused all the time, and she doesn't really know how to put two and two together in certain ways. And like I said, this element of the story really makes it kind of a tough watch, especially knowing what happens and how Elizabeth Sladen was actually ill at the time. So, yeah. But I will say though, Elizabeth Sladen, what a performance. This is, if this was to be Sarah Jane's last outing, what a hell of a performance. And essentially she is, she's talking to Rani. Oh wait, she talks to Luke on Mr. Smith, to which she keeps calling Luke, despite like constantly calling him like on the same day. And Rani and Clive can see that something's up, and originally they don't think anything of it. They just think, she hasn't had much time to rest. She's probably missing Luke. Probably her best solution is to, go and see Luke. And Sarah Jane is just like, oh no, I'm fine, I know what I'm doing. And then there's a meteor that comes striking down to Earth. So Sarah Jane, Clive and Rani go down chasing out of it to stop a disease which could infect everything. I wonder if this ties into day one from Torchwood. Could you imagine if the gas, the disease, so-called, was in the comet, was the sex gas from day one? That would have been a completely different Sarah Jane adventure episode right there. Sorry. But here it's they go and try to Sarah Jane thought she brought in these canisters, these deep coolant, which will stop the virus, kill it dead before it spreads around on Earth. However, she gets confused and she thought she told Clive to bring it, but Clive didn't bring it, and so she immediately panics and she has no idea what to do, only for a character out of nowhere, seemingly had already done the job, introduce Ruby White, a sort of sassier, almost darker version of Sarah Jane Smith. She seems to be, like Sarah Jane, an alien fighting badass, and she is played by Julie Grahams, who she's been, I can't remember which soap she's been in, but she's definitely been in one of the soaps. She's been a huge actress. She was in Survivals. She's been on like a ton of things. She would later on play a character in the 13th Doctor's era of Doctor Who. But this is her first, I believe is her first outing in Doctor Who. And she really nails this kind of, not a grumpy character, but she's a very serious, she's very like Sarah Jane, like a darker mirror of Sarah Jane. And right off the bat, the two women just don't get along. Both believe in each other to be amateurs at fighting aliens. It just so happens that Ruby White had moved in just down the block from where Sarah Jane had lived. And Sarah Jane finds that immediately concerning as Ronnie and Clive start picking up more about how Sarah Jane keeps forgetting things, and Sarah Jane goes to Ruby's house. They have this confrontation in which, like, Ruby does kind of. There's a scene that I really do like, which is kind of like, oh, wow, is when Ruby is just like, you must be amateurs. You must be someone who doesn't know what they're doing, because if you knew what you were talking about, you wouldn't bring kids. And Sarah Jane is just like, oh my god, that's incredibly true. But she does kind of like shrivel it out of her mind for the moment, but that plays a big part in the narrative. And so Sarah Jane, Clive and Ronnie are chucked out. They, thanks to Mr. Smith, they learn that this race, the Dark Horde, I believe they're called, they've appeared onto Earth, and Sarah Jane seems to just be suddenly full of energy to the point where she's just like, right, this is serious, this is urgent, we gotta go. And she gives Clyde a gun, stating that, you know, these are really serious enemies, and that we got to defend ourselves, and it might come to you needing to kill someone, only for them to arrive, and Sarah Jane seemingly has no idea what's going on. She's forgotten her sonic lipstick, which never happens. She doesn't even remember Clive bringing the gun, and when she realizes as well, it's out of battery, so it's useless anyway, and quickly realizes that she's put Ronnie and Clive in danger to the point where, if it wasn't for the fact that Ruby White comes in and basically saves the day, Sarah Jane would have gotten the two kids killed. And it's here where Ruby teams up with Ronnie and Clive. They take down the bad guys, and the women start having this interaction, a nicer interaction, as Ruby's like, I've done my research, I'm so sorry about my rudeness, you know, I'm usually just like a one-man gang. I'm not used to like making companies, you know, with this lifestyle that we have. So, you know, and then majority of part one is essentially Ruby becoming essentially part of the Sarah Jane team, and originally it just seems all really nice as Sarah Jane can have someone adult to talk to about her life experiences, and in a related a way that she couldn't with the kids. The kids seem to find Ruby to be a really cool, sort of like a badass version of Sarah Jane, who has like a Porsche car, and she has all these cool gizmos, like this little robot device. Her AI, essentially her Mr. Smith, which Clive dubs Mr. White, I believe. Mr. and Mrs. White, see? And whilst this is going on and they seem to be better equipped now at fighting aliens, Sarah Jane seems to be forgetting more things, and there's even a scene where she's talking to Ruby about how she got into this life. It's also confirmed here that Sarah Jane was, I think she said 23 when she first met the Doctor back in The Time Warrior. I could be wrong on that fact, but it does mention how old she was during that adventure, so that's quite interesting. And Ruby's trying to get her to talk about like her life experience, and Sarah Jane's talking about this amazing person, this amazing man who stepped into her life and showed her everything, and his name is Sarah Jane forgets his name, and this terrifies her. So she, after Ruby leaves, you know, because Sarah Jane is a very private person, she gets Mr. Smith to scan her, to which Mr. Smith basically realizes that in her brain there seems to be some sort of illness that's making her receptors deceive. Again, essentially dementia, which I would like to add is very strange. The story doesn't actually tie this sort of illness with what's actually happening. They do explain that it is kind of affecting Sarah Jane in a way, what we later learn. However, the way Mr. Smith explains it basically sounds like she's got dementia. So whether she does actually have dementia and what's actually happening is just making it worse, or whether she just doesn't have dementia and this is all happening due to the influence of the villains, is actually up in the air by the end of the story. And it kind of freaks her out, and she kind of feels really bad, and she feels like she's going to put everyone in danger. She doesn't want to be a burden to anyone. So we get scenes where she's talking to Ruby, and she explains how she's getting too old for this job. The ambassador of Earth, protecting Earth from deadly aliens, whilst also befriending good aliens. She's getting too old for it. She's getting ill. She's getting down. She's forgetting the doctor's name, and she doesn't want to be a burden to anybody. To the point where she seriously considers just moving away without telling Ronnie, without telling Clive, without even telling Luke. Just disappearing from their lives. She doesn't want to be a burden to anybody, and that is really sad, and it does actually tie into Sarah Jane's character that we've learned throughout all of Sarah Jane. She's a very private person, and though the kids get her out of her comfort shell, she's still usually a shy, timid person, and she doesn't really want to be the hindrance of anybody, despite her being a strong, feminist character, which, it's Sarah Jane. She's one of the coolest characters in Doctor Who history. So she's kind of put in a really vulnerable state, and she comes up with an idea which seems like a brilliant one. She puts Ruby White in charge. She can have 13 Bannerman Road. She can have Mr. Smith, to the point where Sarah Jane basically gives Mr. Smith's commands to erase her voice from the database and give all the systems to Ruby. Which I just remembered doesn't actually get solved by the end of the episode. That's a bit of a criticism. And we slowly learn that, Sarah Jane, she's still vulnerable, despite the fact that she's considering just up and going without telling anyone. She suddenly gets this panic, this fear, because she really cares about her son Luke. Luke brought something to her life which was missing for many, many years. A family member. She has a son, a duty of care to him. So she tries to get Ruby to call Luke. Come on, I just need to talk to him, just need to speak to him, just for this moment, and then you can have him again. Only for Ruby to deny the request. She starts gleefully pointing out how Sarah Jane has just given her control of 13 Bannerman Road. And it turns out what is actually happening to Sarah Jane is actually due to Ruby White. She is the main antagonist of the story, as she gets teleported into this room as Clive and Ronnie, they go up to the basement only to find Ruby there in tears, and she plays a fake recording of Sarah Jane basically deciding to up and leave, which really gets Clyde and really makes him upset to the point where he shouts at Ronnie, who put in the idea of Sarah Jane's head that she should take a holiday. And Clive, just can't handle this, and it freaks him out, and so the band is kind of dismantling, and Sarah Jane is teleported to Ruby's house in the in the basement, where it turns out that Ruby is this sentient creature that basically eats people's souls, and that the species comes in two forms: the mouth, which takes the form of a human-like entity, and the stomach, which takes the form of a gigantic blob. And the closer you are to it, the quicker it can eat your life force. And essentially, Ruby plans that it's going to take Sarah Jane's place. Only instead of stopping the aliens, it's going to help them conquer the world, creating more misery, and aka creating more food source and more emotional energy for the creature itself. And that's actually our cliffhanger for part 1. That is terrifying. And it is really, it's a bummer. It's a really depressing piece of television. And I will admit, you've got to go into this mindset knowing that Sarah Jane wasn't planning on leaving the show anytime soon. Elizabeth Sladen wasn't planning on leaving the show at any point. However, it was due to real life circumstances which just so happens to tie into a story in which Sarah Jane also seemingly gets ill as well, which is kind of scary. But I feel like if you go into this mindset, like, I don't know, it just feels like a much bummer that we know that Elizabeth Sladen was suffering at this point, and Sarah Jane, the character, is also suffering in this internal way. It just really gets you down. But in a good way, I suppose, because the acting is phenomenal, the writing is brilliant, and you really get emotionally hooked. It's just sad, not poor timing, but sad timing. Part 2 is where the action starts to pick up, as Rani and Clive slowly start to piece together, but not before essentially Rani starting to suspect something. First of all, she just thinks Sarah Jane has left, and she cries to her mother in a very beautiful scene. Angela Mahindra's acting in that scene is fine wine. It's absolutely fine wine. Clive tries to call Luke to try and get in contact with Sarah Jane, or at least to tell her that she's just abandoned. She's just abandoned Luke, Clive, and Rani, only for Ruby to essentially capture. Because Clive comes up, confronts Ruby, believing that she might have something to do with it, that she could be part of it. Ruby basically reveals that she was in prison on this ship, which is currently hovering on Earth, but she's been there so long she's essentially hacked the system and was able to free herself and come to Earth. And she traps Clive there, and Rani essentially is down, she just feels beaten up. All of a sudden there's a knock on the door. She believes originally it's Clive coming to help, but oh no! You see, this episode sees the return, back into the main series, Luke Smith. Sarah Jane's son returns, as he basically is like, okay, I'm getting really concerned. Clive calls me up, hangs up mid-sentence, tells me that my mother has just sort of abandoned us, and now Clive's not answering his phone. And first of all, Luke, not understanding his emotions essentially, has a go at Rani at first. It's just like, this is your fault. Only before really quickly realising, he was acting emotionally there, so he calms down, and he essentially comes up with this plan to try and hack into Mr. Smith's systems to try and find out what's going on. At least Mr. White systems. And so Rani has to go into the basement and essentially pretend she doesn't know anything, believing that that Ruby is still a human being, and is still innocent in all this, despite not knowing and despite do knowing, and despite got to get her phone, which now has this computer virus built by K9, gets a nice fun cameo as well, as she basically tries to hack into Ruby's system, only for Ruby to basically find out, and she takes Luke and Rani traps Ruby in a sealed vacuum and gets Luke and Rani to teleport to where Sarah Jane is for Ruby to go downstairs and get them in time. Obviously, get all the three characters as Clive is teleported with them to basically essentially free Sarah Jane. There's this massive stomach, and Luke comes up with this genius plan. You see, the computer system keeps her entertained by essentially playing her games, and Luke had hacked into the computer system and essentially made a virtual reality model of just a storm of meteors attacking Earth, making everybody in England absolutely petrified. This overflows Ruby's food source and essentially overloads her process. It basically overfills her as the stomach seemingly starts to die, and Sarah Jane's mental capacity seems to be restored by the end of the episode, and we get this like bittersweet ending where Ruby tries to beg. It's like, please, come on, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do this, and Sarah Jane is just like, but you did, and what you did was absolutely horrible, but even if I could help you, I don't even know if I could, and you did this to yourself. I'm sorry, but it's kind of true. And that is essentially the end of the episode. And yeah, it's a really good episode. A very good, I say episode, it's a two-parter. A very good story. The first half is really the emotional hook of Sarah Jane, where we see her mindset, we see her process, we see her struggle, suffering through this alien dementia. And maybe it's a bit too home for comfort. It's a bit too realistic for comfort. But it's still well executed and well played, and is done with care and precision that any good writer should do, dealing with this very sensitive subject matter. Part 2 is where the action mainly takes place, and we get to all of the fun moments like Luke returning back as, I don't know if he returns as the main character back in series 5, but here he comes back for a nice little, for an entire episode of his own, and he becomes the sort of solution, and we get this really lovely split at the end where Sarah Jane, she basically decides, we're going to relax a bit, and we see them all get in the car as she hangs on with Luke. But one criticism I have is that when Luke comes in, we rarely get any scenes with Luke and Sarah Jane. I feel like we should have more scenes with them together. But again, this wasn't planned to be one of the final episodes of the series, so I can kind of let it off the hook on that. But yeah, there's so much emotions that I can't really get into words what I feel about this story. Maybe it's one of the most easily emotionally connected stories that I have with Sarah Jane. It might be up there as one of my favourites as well. But I feel like you've got to be in a right mindset. You've got to be in a mood where you know you're going to get depressed by the end of it. And it is kind of a shame as well that Sarah Jane's didn't actually end on it, because despite it being a very big bummer, a downer of the series, it would be a nice fitting end. But yeah, overall, I think it's one of the must-see episodes of the series. If you're going to get into Sarah Jane, or you are a fan of Sarah Jane, I believe this is a story where you have to watch it. And that is Goodbye Sarah Jane, the final story of Series 4. So join me next time where we will be going back to 2050 with K9 and his friends in a story which I have no idea about. So join me next time for Mutant Copper, and I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!